think I went to Afghanistan to answer a question. And that question was, can you truly be the master of something you can't bear to lose? And I went there to really answer that, what is the value of human life? That's what I was trying to figure out.
If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO. 2 days after you came down from the summit of Everest, you wrote to the group chat that you had included me in on. It was around 100 people. And you wrote, I summited Friday at 4:48 in the morning. I haven't gotten on this chat because I'm still trying to understand what exactly happened those 4 hours before the summit. At this point, my conclusion is that Everest is not a mountain. It is something else. You summited early on Friday morning. You went silent for 2 days. I want to start there before anything else. What were you doing with those 2 days? What was going on in your mind, in your thoughts?
Well, first of all, hey, Steve, it's good to see you again. That experience, I was posting regular updates. So I was once a day, I would basically text through my Garmin InReach, and my partner would post those updates on the WhatsApp chat, and people were following it. So it was a little strange that I had summited and not posted anything for 2 days. I was trying to understand just what the heck I had experienced. Because there was something that happened on that summit ridge that even 2 months later, it was, it was like magic. There's something up there that was very, very, I'm tearing up thinking about it. Very different.
Hmm.
And I took 2 days out to just really think about whether that, whether I had somehow misexperienced, or like I was just trying to piece together what was it.
Yeah.
And that's why I sent that message. It was 2 days later. It was so strange that someone would summit and not be like, hey, I climbed Everest, and when I got off the mountain, I talked to our lead guide, this guy called Dave Watson, and I said, hey, Dave, I've got to talk to you. And he said, yeah, what's up? And I said, no, I got to talk to you. So we went to the bar and we sat down, and I'd been training for 18 months, so it was like the first whiskey I had in a long time. And I was like, Dave, I experienced this kind of magical, like buzzing, sort of like whoa, 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 and I got stronger. It started about 8,600 meters. It got stronger and stronger by 8,750. I was just like, what is going on? Like it was very subtle at first, but then 8,750 it was an oncoming train. I mean, it was just, and being surrounded by these people worshiping this kind of summit, and seeing those oxygen masks. I mean, there was just something very, very deeply spiritual or otherworldly or religious or whatever, you want to call it. It was really just a life-changing experience, and the guy that sold me a ticket said it would be life-changing, and it really was.
Take me through that morning a little bit. Like, start maybe with high camp.
So we all pray to the Church of Steve House. It's really, I wrote that in one of my updates. The thing is that before I come take you the update, I gotta tell you that I've worked with your company for 5.5 years. I came to you guys. I have never been an athlete. I ran a marathon 15 years ago, and that was basically it. That was the extent of my athletic prowess. I was probably one of out of the 470 or whatever it was climbers this year, I estimate that I must have been in the top 20, 30 fittest people on that mountain. Yeah. Um, it is an absolute game changer when you've got this like infinite well of just pure nuclear power. It doesn't run out. It's just whatever you need to throw at it, whatever the like if you're stressed, if you're late, if you need to overtake, if you need to eat, if you need to like what there's a problem with the regulator, there's like whatever it is, you've just got this like infinite resource you can throw at it. It's just like a complete game changer. So the reason that I say this, right, and I realize we're on a podcast, run by you, and it's some sort of a cheap plug because, like, I've gone through a real journey with you guys. I've really
You have,
like
yeah.
learned, I learned a lot. And it's not like you read a half page, there's like 5 bullet points, and you go apply it. There's a system to it, and learning how to tweak your body and tune it to train. You know, is I think the thing that I learned with you guys. And so that's I think the first part, because that's what sort of I think explains some of my experiences on this climb.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've got getting to camp 4, which is a high camp, that's sort of in the quote death zone, um was one of the absolute best days of my life. Not even best climbing days. I was like, this is going from I think 7,600 to 8,000, something like that, plus minus. And I was exploding with energy. Like I must have overtaken like 30 people on the way up, and I wasn't even trying. You know, I was probably, you know, 150 meters, 450 feet above our team, waving back at them. I was dancing. Normally you're sort of exhausted and stuff. I was just like, this is absolutely incredible. Like I am having, like I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. I'm having the time of my life. I'm looking up at Everest. I'm looking at the western Coombe. There's this incredibly majestic, like huge
Mm-hmm.
valley sort of unfolding beneath me, right? As you go up, the views get better and better. You know, I was listening to some music. I mean, it was like awesome. Awesome. I mean, it was just like you're driving like a Ferrari, and everyone's with Toyota Corolla or something. It was like, you know, overtaking. There's 2 lines, so it's really easy. You just clip to the other line. Overtaking, I lapped my Sherpa a few times. I kind of, as we were climbing, bumped into him. And obviously, I made it very clear to him, like, for me, he was the boss. So I wasn't going to be telling him what to do. But at some point I was like, hey, like you might consider, bumping up your oxygen. And, because he was, and then, and it's funny, kind of the third or fourth time I sort of nudged him by accident. He so turned around. He's like, you know what, just crank it up, and he cranked it up to 2, and I was like, yeah, I thought it would make sense, but it was clear he's not used to that,
Yeah.
so that's getting to camp 4, right, and what came before it, and I entered camp 4, like, look, I was tired, probably because I was like dancing and singing to myself and doing stupid shit, but like it was freaking awesome. I mean, that entry again, goosebumps. Like, you've read about it, you've seen it on the internet, like the famed sort of camp 4 on Everest, and we
South Call.
entered the South Col. That's right. Super windy, trash everywhere, like, and that's the funny thing, right? I'm just like, I don't know all this trash everywhere. I was like a kid in a candy shop. Like I was like grabbing my oxygen tank, wandering around, taking photos, like talking to people, like there's this kind of stress, this undertone in the air, and I was
Uh,
like trying to like listen to it, but at the same time, like I didn't have oxygen on in the tent at 8,000 meters, you know, and I wouldn't have it on for 30, 40 minutes, and then I'd put it back on, wouldn't have it on, do it for an hour and take it off. Like, I was pretty okay. I was not in any kind of like discomfort or pain or anything. I was doing great. And then basically, the ascent, right? And so Fortunately, I had spilled water on my down suit, and so that was an issue that I was sort of dealing with. Um, uh, lot like my sort of crotch, groin area, stomach was sort of soaking wet. So I was like, oh shit, like this is down suit doesn't insulate thermally when it's wet. It's gonna be
Down and
minus
water do
35
not.
out there.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, this is not gonna be good. And I was freaked out. I was freaked out about this water, right? Very freaked out, like panicking, like kind of like shaking, like, oh my God, like am I, gonna suffer frostbite or whatever. And yet again, like for the 100th time on this expedition, right? Just an infinite wall of just energy, you know. So it's funny, I got to the climb, clipped in. We're behind some team that was like huffing and puffing, and and I was in zone one. I was in like I'm going for a walk in the park. This was and I was like, do I want to overtake them or not or yes? And I thought to myself, you know what? I got enough going on with this water thing. I need to dry out my suit. I'm kind of like panicky. So I kind of used it for that, you know. So I kind of, followed this team at what I thought was a snail's pace, like it was almost to the point where it was like I might need to speed up just to warm up, you know.
Mm.
Um and we got to the balcony, right? At that point it was 2 hours later or something, and I had the down suit had dried, and I was just like, hell yeah. And then we climbed from the balcony up, and it's just like, like what I've learned with you guys is to almost like shift gears. Like this is zone one. I know what that means. I know how far that would get me. Let's not flip to zone two, and that was sort of like the next stage of it. I needed to overtake a few people, flip it to zone three. And I know how long I can stay in zone three, what that really means, what I need for recovery. So I'd overtake them, kind of wait a little bit, right? And then sort of keep going, and then we got to the summit ridge, and that's where like it just I don't know what happened, man. Like it was just this incredible, incredible, incredible experience. I mean, it was really like, and it's funny, it's been now, what is it, almost um it's been 2 months,
2 months. Yeah.
you know, and I kept wondering, like, will it fade, will it not? And it's something that I think I'll carry for the rest of my life, as they've pointed
Mm.
out to me. It's really changed I'm just much more relaxed. I've got this incredible thing, this like magic potion that I'm sort of processing. Like even walking on the street in the day is kind of a little bit different. I'm like, wow, I'm just so grateful. I'm
Mm.
so like grateful that the planet offers this kind of an experience, and I got to experience it. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I want to like ask you about some of the other things that you said, because I want to kind of, you and I have been on our own journey of friendship over the last, 5.5 years, and we've had a lot of side conversations, and we've met in person, and we've had a lot of great discussions. One thing that you said is you wrote, mountaineering is a lot about waiting for the weather, waiting for the ice to shift, waiting for climbers that are less fit, waiting for climbers that are fitter, waiting for the supply chain to catch up. It's always humbling. It's always educational.
Mm.
The part of that that threw me was and I want to dig into, is waiting for the supply chain to catch up. That's not a typical climber sentence. Where did you learn to see a mountain that way? Where did this kind of systems thinking that implies come from?
Yeah. Well, I did my PhD at Stanford in artificial intelligence applications for construction. And so I founded a company that does AI applications for construction, so large scale optimization, operations, research problems. I founded a company that does AI optimization for construction, large scale construction projects.
Yeah.
And so, I manage a team of 74 people today, but that's varied. And I think for me, seeing the operation that Lucas had set up on this mountain was just like kind of mind blowing. You know, I mean, to me, it was just I don't get it. Like there was people on that mountain that were like, complaining about like, oh, I don't have this type of food, or like, I need to summit on this specific day because it's my, wife's birthday, or like, and you're just like, hey, this is a really, really dangerous activity. The
Yeah.
fact that Lucas has figured out how to make it a little bit, you know, like safer, and almost luxurious, I think, right? Like, doesn't mean that it sort of changes the underlying tone of it, And so for me, seeing how, he was, had to deal with all these, 100 something people, like all these logistics, on the mountain, like, and seeing that come together, right? And like understanding, like, yeah, we're waiting for this to open up. We're waiting for these things, you got to get the oxygen, 72 Sherpas, a train of people shuffling all back and forth up and down this thing. Like, it takes a incredible amount of infrastructure, right? To put somebody up there, not just to put someone up there, but to put them up with enough of a buffer such that I could experience what I experienced.
Yeah.
And there's the sort of two sides of the puzzle. Like, one is the training I did with you guys. And I think I really, really, like, we can talk about metrics and numbers and all this kind of stuff, right? Really, like, was extremely fit. And then the other side, the sort of operation that Lucas, Furtenbach is running up there. And it's funny. I mean, people ask me, and I'm like, Everest is quite doable. It really is, but it's doable on two conditions. The first is you've got to be like incredibly fit, right? And Lucas said, and I asked him, like, hey, like, do other people have this sort of magical, sort of like almost like cathedralic, like, experience? And he's like, yeah, usually about a third, the top third fittest people that we take up there. And that fitness, I think, enables you to not be just struggling on, surviving and putting the next one in front of the other. So
Absolutely.
that's one. And the other is having that sort of infrastructure that he's got, this unlimited oxygen, 2 Sherpas per climber. Those things are just unavailable elsewhere. The photo I have of the oxygen, reserves at Camp 4 at 8,000 meters. I mean, there must be 200 bottles up there, which is just insane,
Yeah. Yeah. The logistics of it. But I think it goes deeper than that, Renee. Like, from what I know about you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may have some of my facts wrong, but you were born to a Czech mother and a Lebanese father who was studying engineering in Prague. You guys moved back to Beirut when you were very young, plopped right down into the middle of a war zone. I've heard you talk about that, how you were, consistently being bombed the first 5, 6 years of your life. You know, Czech Czechoslovakia at that time was, different place than it is now. You then got into construction, like as besides doing a lot of math, as you once told me, in your kind of student years, you got into construction. You ended up 22 years old in Kabul with a runway that 30% of the country's air traffic depended on, that had a hole from an RPG in the middle of it, and you were in charge of fixing it.
Yeah.
Like this is kind of, this way of seeing the world and coming at the world from a place where there was just war, destruction, and switching that into a place where you're like a builder in the most literal sense of the word, and not just on a small scale, on a massive scale. How did that, like, what did those early years teach you, and how did that shape you, and how does that translate into how you see the mountains and have these experiences?
Yeah, I think, so first, thanks for outing me, I guess. I don't usually, share that much about the story, but happy to do so. I think that the experiences I had in my childhood really got me to think about, like, one's own mortality.
Yeah.
And some people that know me are like, oh, you're some sort of an adrenaline junkie or an adventure seeker or whatever. And interestingly enough, I don't think so at all.
Right.
I am extremely risk averse.
Yeah.
I don't drive motorbikes. You know, if I'm in a park or something or at a friend's house and I see a trampoline, I'm like, hell no. Like I avoid trampolines, I avoid motorbikes. I like the thing at the same time is that like before I know the statistics inside out. I know the statistics for most of the 8,000-meter mountains. What are the fatality rates on them? I know the statistics on Rainier. I know the statistics on Everest. I know the statistics for every mountain I've ever done. I know what those statistics are. And for anybody to listen to this, like, also, I know the statistics are guided and unguided.
Hmm.
And FYI, the numbers are usually like 10x or 100x worse for unguided expeditions.
Yeah.
And so I think I have a special relationship with risk in the sense that before doing any of these expeditions, I spend a phenomenal amount of time thinking about, is this what my soul needs? Is this what I need? Is this what I want? You know, and I think the conclusion I came to in Afghanistan, which is such a strange decision at the time, but I spent 8 months thinking about whether I want to go to Afghanistan. Really, every day, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours for 8 months. And I was like, you know what? This is it. This is what I want to do with my life. And for something like, Denali, I mean, I probably spent 4 or 5 months thinking about that. And for Everest, I think it was not every day, but probably a process of about 6 months of sort of flipping this around in my head. And I took a whole day. I'm talking like it was 8 hours by myself. I was on vacation with a group of friends. I said, hey guys, I really need to do some work today. And the work was I just sat by a pool for 8 hours thinking about, do I want to do this? Um, and when you look at the numbers, right, on the one hand, it's 1.7%. On the other hand, take a look at who's actually passing away on that mountain. And I saw it, firsthand. It's folks that have spent half the amount that we spent, have maybe 1 or 2 oxygen tanks past Camp 4, where I've got unlimited effectively, or 10 that are with us and access to another 20 if I need it, you know. And you start to see that, like, my calculation is that the Everest's fatality rate, if you've got the training and the gear and the setup and everything else, is probably in the, 1 in 3, 4,000.
Yeah.
And that's starting to be equivalent. Like, your chance of getting hit by lightning in the course of your lifetime is 1 in 15,000. So I generally take risks in the 1 in 10,000 range. And those are like pretty safe activities. You
Hmm.
know, so when you look at something like this, like, am I willing to slightly increase the risk from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 3, 4,000? You know, in order to get this life changing experience that really is focaled me, or been the focal point and driven me and taught me so much about myself, like the training. I mean, I 5.5 years for, trained for Denali, I trained for Aconcagua, I trained for all these. It wasn't, forever. So like 9 months of just doing nothing else but training for this one, right? And is this, the right exchange? And the truth was, yeah, it was. Now that I've done it, I mean, I'm like, oh my god, it was so amazingly, such an amazing experience. But also, like, I'm really proud of the way that it was executed.
Hmm.
The amount of time and discipline that went into it, and went into selecting the company, and went into selecting, putting this whole thing together. you know which is why on the summit ridge, I just, like, I had so much buffer that I was highly aware, able to look around, and like, I wasn't maxed out by any means in that. Yeah.
When you say that Afghanistan taught you or made you think about mortality, did it make it clear that there is real risk of being killed and life ending, or was it more like it was helping that you were able to figure out where your tolerances were or are, and say, okay, yeah, like this 1 in 10,000 is generally, just putting numbers that you said to it, but and that occasionally I can dial it up this way, or what is that? Like, what do you mean by that? What did that experience teach you or bring you?
I think, you'd have to go back to this is a, now a deeply philosophical discussion, and I actually think most mountain conversations are deeply philosophical.
Absolutely.
You know, I really, interestingly enough, have not met that many people that want to do it just to kind of pound their chest on the top. because it's so humbling. It kicks your ass so badly. Like, you really kind of learn a lot about yourself. Uh, but to answer your question, I think I went to Afghanistan to answer a question. And that question was can you truly be the master of something you can't bear to lose? And 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 I went there to really answer that, what is the value of human life? That's what I was trying to figure out. I was 22. And I think what I learned there was sort of two important things. One is that for me, these are all very personal things, but for me, what I learned was the conclusion I came to was I don't think one, i.e., myself, should live life being so afraid to die that you can't trade it in for anything. Because that makes life, in my sense, sort of almost a little bit unbearable because at some point you will need to face it.
Yeah.
Whether it will happen in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, like at some point you will need to face that is the eventuality that's on the table. Um, at the same time, I realized that one shouldn't gamble their life on a whim, you know? So, like, just kind of like, oh, let's just take a risk and it'll be fun. I don't think that's something that's worth losing your life for, right?
100%.
On some level, when I looked at this Everest thing, like, sure, all the training and the safety, and I think you and Lucas are best in the world at what you do. Um, that enabled a substantial safety buffer. But anytime I go into the mountains, I'm like, hey, like some, it's not walking in the park. It's not, you know, like your former climbing partner says, it's not playing tennis, you know. Um, so I mean, I think that for me, realizing, what is life worth trading for, or even like at what is worth putting my life at risk in some ways, and how much risk do I want to put it into, right? And so for me, when you look at statistics like K2, where it's 1 in 3 people, like truthfully, it's like incredibly outside my risk tolerance.
Yeah.
It's so out of my risk tolerance. Like I'm unless I think we don't have that skill set, you
Mm.
know. There's certain things that like are incredibly dangerous, or dangerous, like horse riding, for example, right, is a good example, right? The people or skiing actually is a lot more dangerous than people, realize,
Yeah.
right? And at the same time, you've got things like skydiving are probably a little bit safer than people think of, you know, and we're just bad at it. And
For
then the
you.
same, an expedition to K2 versus Everest, like it's not the same ballpark. This isn't like 20% riskier. This is, like 100%, 100 times riskier. And so that's to me like the approach I have with mountains and what I do. And it's even funny, right? I mean, people keep asking me, what's next? What's next? And I find the question confusing.
Mm.
I'm still processing this experience. It might take me a year or 2 or 3. Like Afghanistan took me 2.5 years. I got back and I was like, I just got to process. And I literally, I halted everything. I wasn't a runner. I wasn't, doing hobbies. I literally was just like, hey, I need to get kind of process what happened. And it's very similar with Everest, I think, but in almost this like magical kind of, tears in my eyes, like I'm so grateful I got to do this. Like what an amazing experience way. It's really just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like to sort of summarize what I said, like to me, what I learned in Afghanistan is that for me, one shouldn't live your life where you can't lose it under all circumstances, no matter what. Like at some point you will need to face that eventuality. And also, your life is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
It is the most valuable thing you'll ever own. And sort of gambling on it away, we're just like, who cares? Let's just jump out of an airplane or like go base jump. Like, I'm like, is the thing that you're getting out of this experience, of equal worth, of equal value. And for me, this kind of an expedition to like Denali or Everest, like that's just like it's such a dream. I
Yeah.
mean, I literally, like, I was on an airplane. I started literally crying with tears rolling down my cheek, just remembering Denali and what that, experience meant. So really, we're just very cherished and continue to cherish these experiences I've had. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just hear so much of what you're saying and thoughts and feelings and words I've said in the past. Like there's experiences I had in the mountains 30 years ago that still bring tears to my eyes if I sit with them. You know, that never goes away. So just I don't know if that's frightening or reassuring, Renee, but but I do think you carry that for your lifetime. You touched a little bit on, you know, your background in mathematics. You brought up statistics. Obviously, that's something you spend an enormous amount of time at and became very, very good at. And you've had these very, I don't know what to call them, like in a like repairing runways in Afghanistan. Like that's sort of like, you know, trying to run a diesel generator. You told me this story once. I don't know if you told me the story of like you had this diesel generator in Afghanistan, but none of the fuel in Afghanistan was water free. So you
Right.
had to
Yeah.
design a system to, you had to,
We had to build our
yeah,
own gas station. Yeah.
yeah,
In
to,
order to run a generator so I could turn on a computer and work. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I mean, this is like, you know, your first principles thinking, right? Like you need the computer, but there's no electricity. Why is there no electricity? Well, because it comes from a generator. Why is the generator not running? Because there's water in the diesel. Well, how do we get the water out of the diesel?
Well, I
Like
mean,
that's,
then I was like, "Are you literally telling me that there's no water-free diesel in the country of Afghanistan?" And the look I got was like, "What are you, an idiot?" Like, obviously that's the case. I was like, "Okay." So 3 hours later, we're designing our own gas station that has water-free diesel, so we can pump our own generators. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a really interesting connection, I think, between these kinds of like very hands-on problem solving, systems thinking, and you talked about like the system that a Athlete has built or the system that Fortbach has built to help people climb Everest. What is, and then you yourself have built this company around this. I mean, what started as kind of an algorithm, right? But is now a very complex set of, yeah, I don't even know how to describe it. Code, let's just say, that can solve problems at scale that have a lot of value to people. How, there's a really interesting connection between those two things, and I think that this is one of the things where a lot of people who are drawn to the mountains or endurance sports in general and are successful, and especially are successful over a long period, and I want to get to kind of your trajectory in a minute there. How does that connection manifest in yourself? Like, are these, does in hindsight, does this all feel sort of inevitable to you that you're just like putting together different parts of your personality and how you're going to manifest in the world, if you, for lack of a better word,
Mm.
as René Morkos, and it involves all these different, you know, parts of you, and then that results in these experiences and the you know, building. Help me understand that.
Oh, that's a really sort of good question, kind of a deep question.
Absolutely, yeah, no, and it's a genuine question, Renee, because it's something like that I see the patterns, but I don't have the answers. That's why I'm asking you the question. I can't answer it for you. Like,
Yeah,
how
I
does
think for
that
me, yeah,
work?
that it's again a philosophical question, and I think the de gustibus non est disputandum, in Latin, which means of taste you shall not dispute. So, and I often say that the beautiful thing about philosophies is they're all right. You know, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The meaning of life is 42. The reason it's 42 is it's the ASCII code to the asterisk. It's anything you want. And so, to me, when I look at my life, why would you not want to paint a masterpiece?
Mm,
Why would you not want to see what's on the other side? Why would you not want to have this experience of climbing Everest? And there's unfortunately a category of people that have that thought, and they're just like, oh, I'm just gonna like show up at this mountain, like waltz up it, and that ends very, very badly. And I've seen it live, even on this expedition.
mm,
Um, the um, but the concept of like doing the research to find, the people that are some of the best in the world, right? You can't say who's best, but some of the best in the world at what they do, and learning from them, applying yourself to, unlocking this system effectively, which in this case, that really is a method to the that more than a method to the madness. It's a very fine-tuned, way to do it, both between, your training systems and Furtenbach's sort of expedition, right? Like those are things that I think um those are things that I really like sort of unlocking or learning. And so I think when you say first principles thinking, like, I think there's kind of, to me, it's more of a question of like, what do you want to do with your life? And what I've learned, it's just that it's kind of that Steve Jobs quote, right? You sort of learn at some point, and the world is created by people that are no smarter than you. You can kind of build anything you want. And that's kind of, I think, part of what motivates it. And the other part is like, I want to see, you know, like, what is it like being an athlete? What is it like to train for like climbing these, major expeditions, and like, what an incredible, half decade, 7 years of my life, to dedicate to something like that, to like answer that question, and yeah, I don't know, like that has never changed. It's been the same pattern. It's
Yeah.
just as I've gotten older, that the thing I'm trying to figure out has gotten bigger, like at this point, it's the biggest mountain in the world. And it was phenomenal, like that whole process of like unlocking it, and like that's the thing that kind of makes me happy. It wasn't like I just climbed it, like I didn't summit this thing and go home, like kind of, but just barely making it. Like, no, I had 30% in the tank. Like I was having a time of my life up there. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
the style of the way that it was done was, I think, representative of all of that work and sort of unlocking the system piece, right? Which that's kind of fixed, right? Like the next thing I do is also going to be some kind of like, hey, what's the thing I need to like learn or unlock, or how does this kind of come together? That's basically it. Yeah.
I want to take you back to 5-ish years ago. You were, I don't know, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that, into your first block of training. And, you know, you were like, I don't get this. The workouts, there were 45 minutes of easy running. Nothing was complicated. You weren't feeling like you were destroyed. Yeah. Walk me through that disbelief that you experienced and what helped you to keep the faith.
We've had this conversation. I think you guys do an incredibly poor job at explaining what you do. You know,
Yeah.
like I've introduced you to people, and they'll have the same experience. They're like, sort of like, I don't get it. Those guys just telling me to run in circles for like 45 an hour. Like, what BS is this? Um, Look, the truth is, you take that to where I was before leaving for Everest, and like, here's an interesting question. So people, I'm like, hey, so I spend 4 hours on a stairmaster on Saturday, and I'll do maybe 3 hours on Sunday, maybe three and a half, 3.5. Like that's my life for 9 months. Every Saturday, Sunday, I spent 3 to 4 hours, not less than three, not more than four. Somewhere I'm sitting on a stairmaster, and people are like, well, oh, that sounds so boring. But what do you do? And it was like podcasts or whatever. And sort of funny, I'm like, actually, I've got a lot on my hands. I'm fine tuning the training, increase the speed a little bit, decrease the speed a little bit, wipe the sweat, water, a little bit of food, you know, tweak this, move the weight over, wipe sweat, increase the speed. And it's because I like over the years I worked with you guys, I've learned like the difference between, and it's funny, right? Because like originally even you guys were like, hey, training outside. And it's, if you can figure out, it's such an like non-intuitive way to train,
Yeah.
because what you're effectively looking for is the exact right intensity. And it took me, 8 months or 6 months of working with you guys where I could actually tell when I crossed that threshold. There's like a little bell that goes off. It's very, very subtle. So no way in hell's earth that, if I did this for a decade, I would have figured it out. And the stuff that you guys work with is and you don't market it that way, but like it is what Olympic medals are made of.
Yeah.
If you look at Olympic athletes, like they are using, I probably know the basics, I know them pretty darn well at this point,
Yep.
but this is basically what Olympic medals are made of.
Yep.
And it's counterintuitive because you want to go for a run and you're like, hey, like if I go for a run, I want to train. Like all the movies have someone really like working hard, and so, I got to really sort of like, put the pain in. And the interesting thing about it is like it's that's the last thing on earth you should be doing. Like that's called zone 3. Don't do that. You
Yeah.
need to have a slow, steady run. And then the part that you here's the deal: is like, is it really worth, like, and I worked with a personal coach from you guys, like, is it really worth a personal coach to tell you that intensity of where that flips? And I'm like, that's the whole game. If your aerobic threshold is, call it 158 on this week, and you're training at 163, like you can take that training and throw it out the window.
Yeah.
And if it's 158 and you're training at call it 140 or 145, it doesn't get you the juice. But the truth is, like, what's freaking crazy is that what I learned with you guys is I could identify that, aerobic threshold bang off the money. Like I know it, I can feel it.
Yep.
And I would feel it going up week by week. And what I learned with you guys is just to be 3 beats below it. And if I and the truth is, if I had other stuff going on, my partner calls, there's some business meetings, etc. Like I'm not focused on the training session, I would exceed it or be below it, and that training session wasn't very efficient or effective. But holy cow, like if I nailed it, if I got into that gym and I did 3.5 hours, and I know that my aerobic threshold on that week, for example, was 165, and I was at 162, bang on the money for 3.5 hours. Like that feeling of leaving the gym, I'm like, bam, I know exactly what's going to happen over the, like I will wake up 3 days from now and I will feel it jump.
Yeah.
And that's the thing where, like, and to answer the question, like, why did I keep the faith? I kept the faith because I think, unlike most people, I'm like, I've worked with, through Stanford and other places, like people that are best in the world at what they do. So I'm like, even though these guys aren't explaining it very well, right? Like there's got to be something they figured out in the last 20 years, And so that's what kind of truthfully, that's what kept me going. Cause I was like, I don't get why, like, what do you mean run at a certain heart rate? That doesn't make, like, sure. Okay. And it's interesting. I would always exceeded and I wasn't really listening to what the coach was saying, but I was like, you know what? I'll bet on the fact that there's something here. And oh my God, is there something there? Like just FYI, I wanted to get my heart checked before I did this, And so I went to the cardiologist and they put you on this treadmill and these, electrodes, and it goes up. And at some point he starts looking at me like, hey, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. Like, let's keep going. And he's like, this is usually where I stop people. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. So we went, another few minutes past that, and he increased the analysis. And when we finished, he sort of looks at me and goes, hey man, I've been doing this for 28 years. You're like in the top 20 fittest people I've ever met. And so I was like, I don't know. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, I didn't really internalize it. Then I got to like Everest, and I just like, holy cow. Like we had ultra marathoners with us, guys that are doing 140 mile an hour, 140 mile races and things like it's just crazy. It's just insane. I mean, like my aerobic threshold, by the way, before I left for Everest was in the 168, 169, maybe even scraping 170.
Yeah.
What that tells you is I could basically sustain a heart rate of once. My training for 3.5 hours was at 168, 167 beats a minute. 167 was like, that number rings with me. Like I know that number, and I could just, and it would be flat. It goes up when you're sort of out of breath, when you sort of, it's more than you can handle. It's 3.5 hours, 167, bang on the money, and that's kind of what I was able to do. And that's like, it just insane, Yeah.
Yeah, my rule of thumb with this is like within about 5%. So like that's a good sliding scale, right? Because if your aerobic threshold is 120, 5% is 6 beats. If it's 170, 5% is a little more. But
Yeah.
so the window is a little bigger. And
Yeah.
people need to understand that, your aerobic threshold changes a little bit every day. It has a lot to do with your recovery status, which has to do with, how hot it is, how hydrated you are, how well you slept, how much stress you have. Like it can be a lot of factors. We're not just purely robots, right? So this is also where the coaching comes in, where you're like, okay, given what I've seen and how you responded to yesterday's workout, today you should be able to, like, do your workout at an aerobic threshold that's pretty close to the top. And other
Mhm.
days it's like, you know what, we need to be kind of like 10, if your aerobic threshold's 170, we need to do this workout at 150. And that's where that like kind of fine tuning is and that back
Mhm.
and forth. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Also, like people would ask, like, why, like even after 5 years, like, why am I still working with a personal coach? And the answer is, like, yeah, I got the basics down.
Yeah.
I know I can go to the gym. I know what my aerobic threshold is. I know how to train for it. I know how to measure it. I know, like I can get it. But like, there's these fine tunings,
Yeah.
of like, hey, the knees are a little bit tweaky today, right? Maybe I drop
Mhm.
the weight, or like, maybe we go for a run. Maybe we do something, like, or maybe we take a couple days break. How do you want to increase it? Do you, is it better to put a little bit more weight, slow down, or vice versa? Like, there's fine tunings that you're doing on it, right? Um, yeah, sure.
If you've been wondering whether one on one coaching is the right next step for your training, this is the month to find out. Sign up for coaching and receive a free 30-minute call with one of our specialists. Visit uphillathlete.com to learn more. Now, back to that show. We were talking about your Everest attempt for a couple of years, actually, right? You postponed it for a year
Mhm.
due to
Mm,
some work stuff that was going on that required your
yeah.
attention. You got through that. You came back. You did about 9 months, roughly 2 months sleeping in the hypoxic tent.
Mhm, mhm.
And then you went up to Mara Peak and you had a pretty rough night at like 5,000 meters. Kind of walk me
Yeah.
through that. Walk me through your thinking and what the tent bought you. And I'd love to hear a little bit of that
Yeah.
story.
So there's a new game in town. You get to sleep in these hypoxic tents, right?
Right.
So that means you acclimate before you get there. You know, now the truth is that, like, could you theoretically acclimate at home, show up at Everest, and like waltz up it? Yeah, theoretically. The truth is, probably a good idea to do a dry run just to see if everything kind of like, because you do need to get into the sort of mindset and the mental state and the physical state of climbing up. And so that's why Mara Peak is there. Uh, and that, like, now that I've done it, I'm like, absolutely, like, definitely do like a smaller, like, sort of 1 week sort of, walk around the woods, so to speak, to see if you're ready. The the thing I think I've learned about my body is that I had it on Denali, I had it on Aman Ablam, and I had it on Everest. And it seems like my body goes through some kind of, like, it kind of builds up, and there's like a really, really like shitty night of extreme. I don't get nauseous, but like I'm talking like an 11 out of 10, 12 out of 10 nausea,
You know,
like writhing. I don't feel well. And it lasts in all three cases lasts somewhere between like a little more than 4, a little under 6 hours. And then I'm done. I wake up in the morning. I'm like, yeah, I feel great. There's some kind of like something snaps or breaks, or there's something that like kind of flips. And so I think what I've learned with Lucas's, sort of approach with hypoxic tents is, they're standard even for regular expeditions. So we did the fast one where you can do it in 3 weeks, but even the folks that do it regular like also use the tents
mhm.
for 4 weeks, not 8 like us. And I think it's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Increases safety. It really is a huge sort of safety buffer. But I think that, like, my understanding is that those tents can only replicate low oxygen. They can't replicate low pressure. And so there's something else that the low pressure does. But the difference is that your body can do that in a couple of days versus the couple of months it needs to produce the red blood cells.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that you do this sort of, dry run. You pick up some of the the other non so time intensive acclimatizations in that period. And then, for me, like, yeah, I also this time came prepared. So on the last expedition, the guide was like, well, why didn't you tell me? I was like, what can you do? Well, I would have given you an anti-nausea pill. It's something that like pregnant women use. And I was like, oh, so this time I had one of them with me. I felt this thing coming on. I took it, and it really just, like, it didn't make it completely go away, but it went from like an 11 to, like, call it a 4,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but those moments, like, yeah, every time I'm like, man, like, why am I here? Like, is this really what I want to do with my life? Like,
It's
this
getting
really,
comfortable.
really, really sucks, and then it's funny. Then it's like literally that was it. Wake up in the morning and you're just like, hey, this is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that has really been moving in the last, like, I'd say 3 years now, I think it really kind of something clicked, is that I mean, not just a pro athlete, I mean, the greater high altitude acclimatization interested community sort of figured out just through trial and error the last 20 years, like kind of the right pace, the right dose. And again, like acclimatization, it's a lot like training. It's the response is highly individual. And so what you have to read is a person's response, and then you have to adjust based on that response. You can't just
Yeah.
follow a formula and be like, yeah, we increase, like, I don't know, the sleeping altitude on 100 meters a night. Like that doesn't work because everybody's response is too individualized. So now it's like we're taking in data, oxygen sat, sleep data, that kind of thing, and then being like, okay, well, here we need to pause here for a little bit. Okay, now let's take it up a little bit, and we're also giving ourselves more time. We're giving ourselves more, typically 8 weeks. The other approach, and a lot of the guide services that we work with for Everest and Denali that use these things are very good with helping us get this message out, is the training load has to go down during that time too, right? Because your body's got to adapt to this acclimatization stress. And so we need to have most of the training in the bank before you go into the tent. And so there's all these kind of different things that we figured out how to balance and adjust. So I think there's been a lot
Yeah.
there in the last couple of years. It's come together.
There's definitely something that, like, why train with a co, that's the thing that you guys provided, right? You got someone I'm working with, right, who's used a tent.
Yeah.
So he's highly aware of what and he goes, hey, easy, easy, buddy, easy. You're sleeping at, 6,000 meters at this point in time. That's not good for you, right? No, like I don't want you to do 3 hours on Saturday. Just do 45 minutes, And so then, what is the maintenance mode that you're in? So that's, I don't, it's not stuff that I would be familiar with. Like, how do you maintain instead of increase fitness, right? How are you feeling on that day? And that's the fine tuning. So yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what you wrote in the group chat about your night at 6,000 meters was not leaving the tent or sleeping bag until like 6 in the morning and taking 20 minutes to get dressed. That was some good writing. I want to actually go back to the something you said in the group chat and collect on something you wrote. And this was early. I can't remember exactly, but early May. And you wrote, I often say that mountaineering is the cure for the male ego. More on that later, but you never wrote more on that later. So here I am collecting. What did you mean by that?
I think, like, the nice thing about mountains is, like, I think there's a lot of learning coming from hacking your ego down.
Mm,
It's usually where the most, so I think, potent lessons, sometimes the most painful ones come from. I think, uh, and mountaineering has this an incredible ability to do that. I was sick when we climbed Denali. That was representing the absolute peak, I think, of what I could do physically. I was a stomach bug, and then on Amada Blam, I had a flu, so that sucked as well, and that wasn't, easy. But yeah, I mean, these mountains have this ability to just really, really, cut you down to size. I had it that night on Mara Peak of all things, right? And just
mhm,
really, really just not feeling well, painful, etc. Right? Uh, on Everest, yeah, but I was super paranoid about not being sick, so I was like, people make fun of me because I use that hand sanitizer, I think, like everywhere all the time, etc. But I wasn't sick, and so I was very,
Mm.
very fit. At the same time, there's a psychological aspect to it. This thing's big. It's intimidating. People are dying doing it as you're there. You hear these like little avalanches and little rock falls and things like that. It's yeah. I don't know. I would invite anybody to go to that thing and say like, I'm not intimidated. This is gonna be a walk in the park. Like that was all my experience. I was like, this is really big. Like, keep your eye on the ball, have your shit together. Like, yeah, it definitely, like, for sure, it makes you sort of realize, the futility and the incredibly fragile being that you are in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's a beautiful thing to take back to the real world, I guess. You know,
Mm. So where is the ego in the end? Is it gone? Is it quiet? Is it smaller?
I think it's a great question. I think that, is it gone? It's definitely not as confident. Yeah. And that's how I ended up talking to you guys, right? It was on Ores Alba, right? Where my sort of, whatever, I'll just wing it and figure it out when I'm on the mountain, like, did not no longer worked.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, hey, I gotta go and find someone that knows what they're doing and start training with like an actual pro and go do it. So to me, yeah, the ego, I think it's still there. I'm still me. It's just, I think, a lot more humble. Yeah, easy.
Yeah. I want to circle us back around to kind of what I think is the most powerful part of this experience for you, which is sort of the summit day. And you had written it was something otherworldly. It felt like we touched the gods as the heavens opened. The sun rose, lightning storms below us.
Mm.
The winds picked up as we entered the jet stream, like some kind of Aztec or sacrificial ritual. The energy was insane. So you kind of reach for Aztec ritual for the gods. And like one of the areas I'd say of our friendship that's developed that's been most valuable to me is understanding how you spend your time proving things with mathematics and with data. And that seems kind of at odds with this ability to not just see, but accept and be open to this kind of, you know, you said it yourself, spiritual experience. Where does that language come from? How do you connect those, that kind of hyper logical, you know, mathematical, everything is solvable world to being able to have that kind of experience in the middle of the highest piece of real estate on earth?
It clashes is the simple
Mm,
answer. And
yeah.
that's, I think, why when I got off the mountain, like I kept trying to like figure it out. I was like, oh, I'll reach a point where I'm like, oh, I get it, right? Oh, that's it. And that's when the guide, this is just 2 days or 3 days later, was like, no, buddy, you're not gonna figure it out like that. No, I was like, I need maybe like a couple of weeks. And he goes, no, it'll be like a lifetime. So yeah, that's the question. Like it is, it does clash. There's a congruence in some ways. I don't know. I think life is full of contradictions.
Yeah.
Um, I think that yes, my engineering logic sort of AI brain wants the answer. Um, but that's, I think, that the most beautiful thing about it, right? That it's like magic. It like, I'm really tearing up thinking about it. You can't explain it. Like there's something about it that you, the more you try to touch it, the more it'll disappear. It's something very like ephemeral. Um, yeah, and like there's a strong part of me that's like, I wish I could be like, oh, here it is, like, like it's this I can name it, and this is how, this is the emotion, and everyone's like, oh, I get it, and it's just. But that's the thing. I had this. I think it was like 2 weeks later where I had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm never gonna like fully get it,
Mm.
And so yeah, I agree. there's a strong part of me that's like, not, what I call like woo or tree hugging or whatever. And that's just at the same time I listen to it. In Afghanistan I saw, the life force, right? I really got to see like auras around beings and things like that. And it was really like, you really start to understand that there might be more to the universe than just meets the eye, you know,
Mm.
from a sort of energetic perspective. And it's funny, I talked to the guy, to Dave, at some point. 'Cause 2 weeks later, I called him and I needed another therapy session, and I I said, hey man, I think that there's a couple of things. One, I think I got to experience it because I was so darn fit. He's like, yeah, definitely. And I said, two, um, I said, it started happening at like 8,600. Is it because we're literally the highest thing on Earth at that point? Like, is it this entire mass that's floating through space is kind of most closely connected to the rest of the universe through that one little tabletop? And the answer is like, yeah, like that could be it. Like, yeah, you mentioned the little WhatsApp thread that I had going, right? And I'm actually going to write a closure, because now that I've sort of processed it and figured it out, and what I'm going to write is, hey folks, so I've it's been a couple of months and I've really had some time to kind of pull this apart, and the sort of two thoughts that really come to mind, and first, it is true what I said. It's not a mountain, it's something else. And there's kind of two paragraphs for 2 seconds. First is like, I think it's quite doable. If people ask me, I'm like, yep, it's quite doable under two conditions, and those conditions are non-negotiable. The first is you need at least a year and a half. If you're sitting on a couch, you need a year and a half to 2 years of just, you know, 6 days a week training,
Yeah.
with, Steve House. Look, that's literally it, because it will train you in a way that you just don't like. You will be a superhuman by the end of it.
Or
You
and
know, and if you're fit,
shout out to Coach Jerome, who was actually your
yeah,
coach. I mean,
yeah,
I may have taught him a few things, but it
yeah,
was
yeah.
him working with you.
Yeah, Jerome. I mean, that's the where do you find these guys? This guy's like, he's a feral wild animal that like does not belong in civilization. He just, and he's got the PLA door, right? He's got
Yeah,
the Nobel Prize of mountaineering. It's
that's where
like,
I find
and you
him.
work. Yeah, it's just that they're like, he's not available on the weekends, because he's obviously climbing, right? But like Sunday evening, he'll like get off some mountain, like he hasn't showered, like, you doing okay? I'm like, dude, everything's fine, relax, you know. But like, I mean, this is the kind of guy you're working with, and then like, it's just the way he trains you, like, I've kind of heard like, he's like, whatever, dude, cry me a river, get back to the gym. Uh, but yeah, he's just phenomenal, right? But I mean, like I said, I think one, the training, and then this is also what I don't get. People spend the kind of money and go on an Everest expedition, like, if you were to work with a coach, that's like 4% of the cost.
Right.
Like, it's the only thing that's in your control is your physical fitness. And people somehow like, oh, figure that part out. I'm like, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Uh, and then the other is the two conditions. One is the training. Two is having the infrastructure and the oxygen.
Yeah.
And that's where sort of Lucas came in, and I really did a lot of research. I talked to most of the outfits and on that mountain, and I made my choice. And I'm confident there's other great expedition providers out there, but this was definitely the one that I thought was a little bit different in the type of service and the infrastructure they can provide. But based on those two things, it's doable. Like you can get, unless you have some reason, like you could take a regular 45, 55-year-old person, put them on this training program in a year and a half, and then have them go up. I would recommend doing a couple of like smaller mountains on the way. But so that's one. And then two, I think this thing, I experienced in that summit rigs is this kind of like beam, these moments of like having someone coming down and unclip from the rope, and you're holding them, they're holding you, and oxygen mask, you're staring at a mask, and oxygen mask, there's not really even a human face as they sort of go around you and reclip into the rope to continue going down. It's just like really, really, um fascinating. There's just and like just re-experiencing this sort of almost like cathedralic, like it's a cathedral. Like Dave, would oftentimes, at the beginning of the climb, he'd say things like, "Oh, Mother God, Everest, Mother Goddess of the universe," and I was like, it's like hippies, they spend too much time on the mountain. And 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in Europe, and I text them. I go, "Mother Goddess of the universe," like I totally get it. It's literally it. And that's that, like magic, like holy cow, it's really like something like life changing. It
Mm,
really is. Like I'm just so much more grateful with my life. I'm so much happier. I'm so much less stress prone. I'm so grateful I got to experience that. It's just something like, how do you explain it? And I
yeah.
think like the last part I would put is there's this article in the BBC with someone that's done it a bunch of times, and he says, he closes the article. It's an interview, and he says, no matter what they say about Everest, the crowds and all of that, and the deaths and everything else, it remains one of life's greatest adventures. And like, I kind of feel like crying, like I think my voice is a little shaky, but like it really is. It
Mm,
really is. It really is one of life's greatest adventures.
mm.
To go there and just sort of put together some group, band of idiots, that are gonna go try this thing. It's a massive, massive mountain. It's really big. You put this together and you sort of say, "Hey, I'm gonna go do this." Like, and then yeah,
Yeah.
one of life's greatest adventures.
One of life's greatest adventures. And, connect that back to what you said earlier about why wouldn't you want to write a masterpiece, paint a masterpiece? Like, right? Like, that's, yeah, I think that there's something super, yeah, something that I certainly very much relate to, those words. So, yeah.
And it's like you like what's modern technology has enabled is like, 15, 20 years ago, I'd have to live in the same town as you to like pick this up.
Right.
Now with training peaks and Garmin and all these devices, right? Like kind of crazy. A guy like Jerome, right, who's like literally won the top prize in mountaineering, is like your guy.
Yeah.
You can literally call him up out of the blue, like, "Hey, I need to figure out XYZ," like, what he's not on some mountain, right? But like,
Yeah. And text him
he's
live 24/7,
yeah,
right? Like,
right. Yeah, like he's literally like, I'm like freezing on the side of Mont Blanc. Like, yeah, this is what you need to do, And it's like,
so I know you've been to Burning Man a couple of times and you had that experience where you walked into design transcendence, something, an experience in a place that's been planned and built and permitted and created from nothing to facilitate a kind of a transcendent experience for a group of people. Climbing mountains isn't designed in that way. Was that how are these two things different? Climbing a mountain and going to something like that. I mean, I can think about, other things. I think sometimes just going to a musical concert with live music can be transcendent, right? How are these different for you?
I think that there's a lot of things that are actually my knee-jerk reaction to what you said is, but they're very similar,
Mhm.
and the similarity is that like it's something that like, you know, a lot of people look at it and are like, well, why would you want to do that? Like that sounds, dangerous and uncomfortable and really sort of out there. Like, why do that? Yeah, I think my knee-jerk reaction to what you said is that they're very similar. There's definitely differences, and I'll tell you what the main difference is. I think in both cases you're doing something out of the ordinary, and that's just been the story of my life. I find it like one of those fascinating things in the world is when someone gives you a window into who they are.
Hmm.
And I've hung out with people like in Afghanistan. I've hung out with people that like sold large scale weapons. I've hung out with people like, and when they really show you their life, it's just fascinating. I'm always like, wow, that's kind of like what an interesting experiment, to be like that person.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, whether like going to Burning Man or like, it doesn't, I've done Machu Picchu, I've done lots of stuff where I'm like, oh, let's do that. Let's try that. You know, it's always the same. It's always like an incredible amount of preparation, research. Like, I'll take this kind of risk like once every decade or so. You know, it's kind of I'm good, and it takes me 2-3 years to kind of sift through it. Um, uh, uh, Obviously, after Denali, like you're training, you're on this sort of like train that's moving. You don't want to wait a decade before you do, Everest. So, like that's one reason why it was compressed. Um, but that's the similarity of it. It's that sort of let's unfold the card. Let's see what's on the other side. That's how I've chosen to live my life. Like, why would you not want to see that? And it's sort of interesting to like. No one's saying you got to like it. No one's saying that like, oh, this is going to be my thing. But the experience, I think like everybody should do a tandem skydive once. Everybody should climb a 4,000-meter peak once. Like just kind of be like, oh, that's like, oh, this whole world. Like for me, it was like this whole world of like mountaineering. There's like a whole bunch of people around the world that like are like, you know, fanatical about this thing. Like what is it? Like why? Um, the big difference though is the big difference, you know, is the discipline and the effort required. And I think oftentimes like there's this latest sort of craze of folks that are like doing these psychedelic retreats and whatnot. Like yeah, you go somewhere and you do this thing and like you come back and like oh it really like shook up a lot of things and I've learned XYZ. There's not usually a lot of like effort or skill required. And for me at this stage of my life, I'm 44. I really prefer things where you need to put a good amount of time and effort into it to get something out the other end.
Okay.
Especially with this where it's such a like healthy way to live life, right? I don't think climbing Everest is necessarily healthy, but the training for it, like now it's interesting. I don't think I can see myself without I don't know 6 or 8 hours of exercise a week. I don't think I can do it anymore because it's been so long where I'm exercising. And
Yeah.
I've got so many things in my repertoire. I want to do a stairmaster, go running, lift weights, and so on and so forth. So like, yeah, I think that's the fundamental difference. I think at my age, I prefer things where it probably has some kind of a health factor. It probably has some kind of like large amount of effort required. You know, to unlock something that like not a lot of people get to unlock. Like that's kind of I think in my 20s, I was a little bit different.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
busy, my 16, 17, skateboard and a beer, right? And that was kind of the extent of what I could do. But that's it. I mean, I've grown up, and
Yeah.
this is kind of a grown up playground.
Yeah. 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 I think that, I've always thought that. So, I mean, the root of uphill athlete itself is because it comes from, me having my accident back in 2010 and then needing something to kind of do during my, 2-year recovery. That led to the publication of Training for the New Alpinism, which is what gave birth to Uphill Athlete without any planning on our part. And the whole reason I went in that direction was as I was like thinking about, I was reduced to not being able to walk, right? Like I was in a wheelchair in my own home. Like I was really, really, really physically messed up, but I didn't know if I was gonna, if I was ever gonna even be able to climb anything at all, and let alone continue as a professional climber. And when I looked around at like, okay, if what do I do? Do I go back to school for something? Like I have a number of interests. Do I just go in a totally different direction and go become a pilot, which is what my original part of my original plan in life? Or and my reflection was like, climbing mountains is a form of transcendence. It is a pathway to transcendent experiences. We
Mm.
all need those in our lives. It's how we, especially I think in the modern era. Like I don't know that people needed those 200 years ago when survival and the world was different, but given where we are now. And if I could help more people have that kind of experience, and the training is like the cover, right? It's actually not the result. The result is the transcendence. That's what I'm really trying to guide people to. The training is just sort of like, the thing you do along the way to get there. Like the destination, I guess I should say, is having an experience like what you had on Everest specifically, but also, we've talked about Denali and other times, and the training is sort of the trick and part of the price of admission. And I think that they're inversely proportional. I think that you know I went and saw The Cure in concert a couple months ago,
Mm.
and that was a fully transcendent experience. I was like, we were like, a couple rows back from the stage, and I mean, I had no expectations, but they were incredible. And I mean, it was mind blowing. And, a couple days later, it was sort of gone, right? Like, it was incredible, and it wasn't that deep in the end. Whereas I explained, like, how there's climbs I did 30 years ago that I think about on a weekly basis, and that I can still give myself, as you said, feeling goosebumps or 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 having tears because of those experiences are so meaningful or so intense or so moving. And I think that those are very different things, and I think that both all are we need all of it. Like, we need both. We need all of these things. So it's really interesting to hear that kind of connection for you.
Yeah, I think like it's interesting when you were talking. Like, I think we maybe uh, don't fully agree on this one, and here's why. I think in the sense of like, is the point of these transcendent experiences? I don't know. I would strongly feel that if you are gonna go do a climb because you want the transcendent experience, there's a very high probability you won't get it.
100% agree. Yep.
And it's like if you're open to whatever comes, there's a much higher probability you'll have one of these like life altering experiences. The thing that a lot of people are like, well, like, I want to do Everest. What do I need to do? And I'm like, well, here, I trained for 5.5, they're like 5.5 years. I'm like, no, but it was like for other mountains, right? Yeah, you'll do like 9 months, and you can take a couple of months off. Then you can do like 6 months, like, and truthfully, you'll probably need to do that for 2-3 years, depending on fast you go through it. And everyone's like, oh my god. I'm like, yeah, but the point is the journey.
Yeah.
Like because I've been an athlete for 5.5 years, like I will basically have this in my life for life.
Yeah.
That is my default state now. I cannot imagine a life where I don't do, wake up on a Saturday and maybe go for an hour or two run. You know, it's and it that thing that like it's changed who I am, and that's in my mind more valuable than the transcendent experience I had in Everest. Which, interestingly enough, that really did change who I am as well, and that's something that does seem like it's going to be around for a lot longer. The thing I'm trying to say is that the training that I've done with you guys, it it's not going anywhere. It's
And
part of who I am. It's a very solid thing that has really changed in my life. Where I know, like, I mean, these days I go to the gym. I'm like, it's a very familiar environment. It didn't used to be the case.
yeah.
I'm sure there's listeners that are like, I go to the gym. I'm kind of like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here. Maybe everybody knows that I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, whereas nowadays I'm like, I've spent so much time in these gyms. Like, I kind of really know what it is. And I think, to me, that, you know, change who I am through the exercise and the discipline and knowing my body and all of those kind of things, right? Like, being in some, YMCA gym in Prague in the basement with some guy who, used to be a gold medal, cyclist, and is now pricking my finger to measure a lactate threshold. Like you end up in these situations where you realize that this whole world of athleticism and sports, right? And like, now you're part of it. And so to
Mhm.
me, that is the thing that I think is the part I would focus on, or is the most valuable, you
Yeah.
know? And the transcendent experience is like, will come when you least expect it. Like, because I've done it before. I did Denali, I did Nama Double. So I did not expect there was going to be this kind of a insane experience. and those will be things that they'll happen, out of the blue, and it's amazing. Don't bet on it. The other stuff you're getting is like, you can definitely bet on taking that to the bank. Like if you spend 9 months training for something, that's, I think, what most people don't realize. It's like, oh, I got to train for 9 months. I'm like, yeah, you get to do that.
Yeah.
And then that's what I was the same way. I was like, oh my God, what a pain in the ass. Like, look at all the time I'm putting into it and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly I realized, I was like, oh, like now it's part of me, and that's great.
Yeah. It's the difference between wanting to climb Everest to be the person that climbed Everest and wanting to become the person that can climb Everest. Like, those are different
Absolutely.
kind of, and the transcendence only happens when the ego dies at least a little bit, right? And you don't know when that's going to happen. And I think that's part of it too. And it's like there is a randomness to that. I think it's
There was
been,
very like, yeah. Sorry, there's interject, but like, there's something really interesting, which is like, people are like, what was the summit? And I'm like, funnily enough, the summit was like cool, but the last, that like summit ridge, and it's interesting. Like, I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm gonna have summited Everest in 30 minutes. I was just like looking around, like, what the heck is going on? Like, there was no part of me that was like, oh, I can't wait to stand on top of it. It's just like, holy cow, this is so cool. So yeah, like, there definitely, I feel like, wasn't this like egotistical, like, oh, I'm gonna go be the guy that stood on top of Everest. So yeah.
I think that's super interesting. Well, you have another big objective coming that I know is going to be hard. Beach honeymoon, I believe, is in your future. So
marriage. Is, people
marriage.
ask me what's that. I'm like, marriage is the next Everest.
Yeah, 100%.
Everyone I've talked to tells me it's hard.
Well, I heard from one. I'm no expert. Can't help you there. But I believe in it. I believe in the transformation that can happen there too. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, allowing me to be part of your journey in the way that you have, René. It's been one of the things that I enjoy most about running Uphill Athlete these last almost 10 years is getting to be part of these stories in some way. And I wouldn't be part of it if I didn't have these conversations with you, both online, offline, in Prague, all over the place. So let's keep that up. I really am grateful for that. And thank you.
Hey, Steve, as you see, like, I got the prayer flags and the picture of Denali, and all of that's what you've really unlocked for me, And then I think the most important thing isn't really the mountains, but like to be an athlete. That's the thing that is like, I'll cherish, like, more. Truthfully, I cherish more than anything else, right? And you've really, like, you're the guy that unlocked it. And you and Jerome, the person that you introduced me to, right, that like unlocked this in a way that not only did I climb it, but I got to enjoy it. I was really like so much safety buffer in the tank to do it. That's just like really incredible, and I'm so grateful to you and the work you've done, and like, what you've introduced me to. So thank you. I cherish it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's been a great journey. So thanks for telling your story, and to everyone listening, thanks for sharing in this storytelling as well. Together, we are Uphill Athlete. Hey, real quick before you go, everything we publish, the articles, new podcast episodes, and the live webinars are announced first in our newsletter. You can elect to receive between 1 and 3 newsletters a month. They're written by myself and the coaching team. And if you want them, sign up at uphillathlete.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.